Welcome to another episode of Paranormal the New Normal. I'm your host, as always, Jeremy, here trying to make the world seem a little more normal, but these days that's damn near impossible. But my guest today, he may help with that because he has a normal side of things and he has a paranormal side of things, and they kind of blend. So maybe we could help with that today. And my guest this week is Jason Zuk, who is the social psychic, which we're going to dig into what that means more in a minute, but first things first. How you doing tonight, Jason?
Good, Jeremy. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. As soon as I saw your profile, I'm like, oh, I got to get him on. like he seems like an interesting person to me, so I definitely got to get him on too. But
Thank
my oh, go ahead.
No, that's me deleting something that doesn't need to be there. My apologies. All right. Okay.
But
Yeah.
my first question is always in this show: what got you into the paranormal slash spiritual world?
I was born into it. I'll say that simplistically, but my grandmother was a psychic, intuitive person, and my mom, coming from a single parent family, I grew up with my grandparents and my mom on my mom's parents' side. And my whole life, I always had deja vu moments as a child. And I always asked, why do I feel like I've done this before? And my grandmother always said, keep it hush, keep it to yourself. But you're probably getting something from intuition, or, she didn't call it psychic. She always said intuitive or intuition. And then over time, I figured out that, like, even though I trained to be a lawyer, went to law school, to college, all that stuff, there was an intuitive thing that I knew about. My mom has it, my brother has it, people in my family have it. Like, it's just something that I kind of ran from for a while. In other words, when my grandfather died in 2004, I was by myself, and I didn't expect a paranormal experience to happen the night of his death when orbs of light came to me in a hotel room. But that's what happened. And he reassured me and he told me I'll be okay. And nothing, from
Yeah.
that point on, I knew I was a medium, and I knew that I had some type of thing. I just didn't know what to make of it for a while. It took me about 10 years.
Which is not it's not a normal thing for that to happen from what I've been told on this show
Yes.
multiple times. Like, it's just it takes time to develop these skills, and, I mean, I personally have had psychics tell me that I have these skills, I just haven't developed them yet, and I'm like, "Well, I've been alive 34 years, can they come around anytime soon?" Like
It
like
varies from person to person. Like my mom, she's 76, God bless her, and she didn't realize she didn't call herself psychic intuitive till she was 73, when she was on a flight with me going to New Jersey 3, 4 years ago. And she asked me to read someone between us, and I was reading the person. My mom said she picked up everything I said, and it took her 73 years to realize those hunches weren't just hunches. They were actually information coming from spiritual sources. So it varies. You could be 50 and have a spiritual awakening, or five.
God help those five-year-olds, that's all I gotta say, because they're gonna not know what's going on, but and actually, I've done a couple episodes about that, about how to ra with guests who were experts on how to raise kids with intuitive abilities,
Oh,
so
yeah. It's a
it's
process.
a oh, it's a process, and it's a very fascinating topic, though, kids with that ability. I mean, it's not all like The Sixth Sense where it's just, "I see dead
I
people."
see
Like,
dead people. No, yeah, yeah, yeah. It's more mainstream than that, and it's not as, you know, it doesn't seem
yeah,
as
it's
popular as they call it.
yeah, it can be a very sensitive topic, though. Some parents, of course, wanna hush the kids and, like, tell them to p keep it a secret for as long as possible. Other ones, well, I almost wanna say the good parents, nurture the kid's gift and teach them how to use it properly, but or if they don't know how, find someone who does know how, but either way, those are some of the people I talked to in the past about that, but so born with the ability. Well, the second question I ask everybody is, have you had any experiences with ghosts, spirits, anything in the paranormal world, kind of
Every day,
aliens?
every day. I'm When I say that, I mean, like, if I give a reading to someone, I pick up on their deceased loved one, then that's obviously contact with the other side. And I do that regularly as a side thing outside my legal job, which I would say I'll be offering less now because I'll be busier with my new job. But and then the alien thing, I mean, my best friend who I do shows with, her name is Megan Kane. We have a new podcast coming out called Psychic Visions. She actually has a ranch that I went to her ranch a few years ago and saw my first UFO. Never expected that while stargazing. So I've had some experiences with that. I believe I simplify it by saying we're spiritual beings living in a physical world. And if you think of all of us as spiritual, then me being able to read energy or, have some type of connection that the traditional explanation doesn't fully cover it, in my opinion, then there needs to be an updated explanation. And so that's how I kind of go. I say, yeah, we all have spiritual experiences. And a lot of us have moments where we are like scratching our heads going, did that just happen? And the answer is yes, it just happened.
Which makes sense. I mean, it does make sense. But well, I guess let me phrase it this way though. Do you ever see them in actual like physical form, the spirits that you see, or do you just hear them?
Well, you're asking. So basically, when I pick up on spiritual stuff in a reading, for example, I get all five senses that pop psychically. So I'll get a vision. My clairvoyance is very strong. Hearing them, I'll hear them sometimes with certain things they'll say, but human words can't really adequately explain what a spiritual experience is like, because it's like apples and oranges. You can't really describe something from a point of reference. And I'll give you an example. I believe that our physical bodies are our limitations in this lifetime, where we get around like avatars, but we're limited in our ability to comprehend and understand things. And I feel like when you take the afterlife, you no longer have those limitations. So it's a really big difference in terms of what you can pick up on and sense and do in the afterlife compared to being here and now in this 3D world. So if you were to look at like how do we approach like when we cross over the spiritual side of things, you could be in 5 different places at once as a spirit, because time doesn't exist on the other side, and you're pure energy. And I believe that over time, our scientific understanding of how energy intersects in our lives and the spiritual side of things is all going to come together in the next 15, 20 years. There's going to be a discovery made, for example, I believe that when the body ceases to exist at the spirit and there's a separation, we call it death, you'll see the actual separation of the spirit from the body. And there'll be some type of thing that'll pick that up on a deeper level than we ever imagined. That's the kind of stuff I see happening in the future.
Okay. I mean, and actually I've talked to a lot of people who agree with that. And I mean, I've been told there's a great spiritual awakening that's happening in the world as of right now. And some people say it's been the last 5 years since like 2017-ish. And other people say it's been since 2012, which you happened to mention to me off camera something that happened to you in 2012. And I kind of, in my head, linked the two things together in a way.
Yeah,
So,
I had a premonition dream. If you want me to talk about that, I could say that. I had a dream in 2012 when I was trying to figure out what my relationship is with spirituality in my life, before I was ready to be open about being psychic, and I just wasn't there yet. But I had a dream that I was in a bar, and it was a futuristic dream at the time in 2012. I was in this bar crowded with a lot of people, and I was asking around like, who's here? Who's here? And a woman with dreamcatcher earrings, little feathers on her earrings, she turned her head and I just saw her profile, and she was blonde, and I just saw part of her face, and she said to me, oh, Jason Zuk, the social psychic's here. He's filming for his show and he's reading people. And this is before I even did anything openly. I was like, oh, Jason Zuk, the social psychic. And I woke up, and the reason I go by Jason Zuk, the social psychic, is my grandfather's last name is Zukovich. When you abbreviate it, it makes sense that I would call myself that. So I got my name and what I called myself from a futuristic prophetic type of dream that just kind of like now seems like it's coming true in certain ways. That I do have a show. That's before I even knew I was podcasting. And so things happen, I think, sometimes that can give us kind of glimpses of our future self. Whether or not we choose to pay attention to that is a different matter. But
right, which that makes sense. And I just thought it was kind of curious. The 2012 thing kind of lined up with what a lot of psychics and mediums have told me
oh
that's
yeah,
in the
the
spirit.
Mayan calendar.
Yeah, a lot of them think that has to tie into like it wasn't the end of the world. It was
Yes,
the end of the world that we knew, kind of, and it
the shift,
became
an
more
energetic shift, basically, right, in our existence and our connection with one another in the universe.
exactly. Which how the Mayans knew about that, God knows. But I mean, I think it's extraterrestrial in origin, but that's just me.
You know how
That's
many Ancient Alien episodes I watch? I'm totally I've been deeply entertained by all that.
I I I love the idea of ancient aliens, but I can't watch that show if you pay me. Like it just it's so much what if and not like
Yeah,
ever any
quite
proof.
entertaining.
Ever. I'm sure it is, and I always said I want to sit down one day and just watch all of it, but I just, never enough time in the world. But especially especially as you know, being a podcaster, there's never enough time in the world for anything. But all right, so and I saw this on your profile on the site that I found you on. You unfortunately had cancer, or might still have it. I think you
I had
beat
it
it,
in 2018, and I had a cancer scare recently, but found out it's not cancer. So technically, I'm cancer free 4 years now.
which is amazing. That's a great thing.
Thank you.
But you knew you had it before doctors diagnosed you with it.
Yeah,
I'm
it
kind of
was.
curious about that.
Yeah, so March of 2018, I was at my job. I worked for myself at the time, and I went downstairs to take a break. And I walked past this picture window that's a dry cleaners at this time. It still is. As I walk past the window, I'm like looking at my clothes, seeing if I'm wrinkled or what. And my clothes are not wrinkled. They're, got them from the dry cleaner. So I have a pressed shirt on and my pants are pressed. And I'm appreciating a nice spring morning, almost spring morning in Tampa. And then I look at myself in the mirror, and all of a sudden, I'm no longer looking at my clothes being wrinkled or whatever. I all of a sudden say to myself, a voice pops in my head and says, "Would it be weird if you had cancer and didn't know it?" And I did like a retake of that altogether, kind of shook myself out of that idea, and it came back. Wouldn't it be weird if you had cancer in your body and didn't know it? And I knew, like, why am I getting this message? I must have cancer. And I just said it so nonchalant, matter of fact, no emotions involved. So I remember going upstairs and talking to the people I worked with at the time, and told them. And then I told family members and friends, and I left it alone for a few months. And then 5 months later, I went in for a CAT scan for my diverticulitis surgery, also arranged. And my doctor calls and says, "Listen, I know you have to do your surgery for your diverticulitis. You've been plagued by that for 15 years. But before you do that, you have cancer." I was like, "Oh, I do?" "Yeah, you got to meet with a urologist." I had stage 1 kidney cancer on my right kidney. And so I chose to do a cryoblast. It took about 2 months between the time of diagnosis to actual surgical procedure. So in that 2 months time, I went through a lot of processes in my mind, as anyone who deals with a cancer diagnosis, even category 1, stage 1, would have to go through the mental hurdles of that. And it's interesting because fast forward to this year, and when I thought I had a cancer scare for a few months, I went through that mental process again. The whole process of preparing yourself for a diagnosis. And they call it anxiety, by the way. If you're a cancer survivor and if you something shows up on a scan, like in this case, I went for a kidney stone and they found what appeared to be a growth on my same kidney in the same place. And I had anxiety for a few weeks because I had to wait about a month to get my MRI done. And, anyone who's a cancer survivor, I'll say kudos out to you, because going through that experience myself, I was totally unplanned, because you never control your health and your prognosis with something like cancer. But the thing, for a while, you might have it again, and to deal with that kind of anxiety from it really gives you a reset, a recharge, to kind of make you appreciate that you're alive, and that, yes, you might be cancer free for 4 years, for example, in my boat, but there could be a quick thing that can happen to turn that around and make me remember exactly what it felt like to deal with the diagnosis in the first place. So it's like, even when you're out of the cancer world of having it, that diagnosis could always haunt you and come back. And so I guess that's one of the things I'll say as a cancer survivor is I never expected that on a minute's notice I could have everything flip upside down. But that's what this is like. It's like living with a blessing, but also understanding that there could also be the south side of that. Like, if something happens and you get a diagnosis, and you may have to make pretty quick decisions. So it really changes how you look at life.
I can imagine. I mean, well, I can imagine because my father, rest in peace, what was a he had cancer. I forget what it's called always, but he had cancer in college, stomach cancer. I forget what it's called always, but
Sure.
he something. I'm
You
not
know
gonna
what?
say, but
I don't even remember the terms too well.
I
I can
know.
explain it to a
Uh,
point, but I learned all this stuff as I got diagnosed with it. And I was like, "Oh, what does 1, 2, 3, or 4 mean?" I'm used to hurricanes. So I can say
Yeah,
category 1. That's why you heard me say category 1 by accident. I do that for my day job. I sue insurance companies, and I say category 1 force winds, not stage 1 cancer. It's a whole way of looking at it in a unique
Yeah.
way. But for your dad, God bless him for dealing with that. I know it takes a lot, and he's,
Yeah,
you know,
he went through that in college, and unfortunately, it did cost him his life in 2017, about 40 years
wow,
later, because 50 years later, actually, because, the actually, no, not 50 years later, couldn't be 50 years later. So, I don't know, 30 years later, something like that, but because, the radiation destroyed the sac around his heart, and he
mhm,
couldn't survive after having heart surgery,
wow,
I mean, it did take his life, it just took a long time to do it, but
sure. We're all dying every day, right? And that's the other thing, like,
basically,
so many of us who have diagnoses think, "Oh, wow." Like, people on the outside look at you and say, "Well, you're dealing with this diagnosis. It's gotta be hard." Yeah, it's hard, but we're all dying inside. But that doesn't mean we're dying. It just means our bodies are aging and that
yep,
we're ascending to that next level, and we're getting, that's how I believe it works.
exactly, I mean, it's the same thing when my girlfriend get my wife, God, she's gonna kill me if she hears this ever, but my wife gets at me all the time for, like, the amount I drink or everything else, and I'm like, "I'm fated to die the day I'm gonna die, at the time I'm gonna die. Nothing is gonna change that, so if it's gonna be from drinking, it's already fated to happen, so I why would I stop?" Like, that's my that's my mindset on all of it.
I understand that. I understand that
Like,
wholeheartedly.
but
Definitely.
so it seems like having cancer almost positively impacted you in some ways. I mean, I'm
Majorly
sure.
majorly positively affected me. I ended a toxic relationship of 8 years. I ended a toxic business relationship. I lost 50 pounds. I reshuffled my viewpoints on life. My paradigm shifted massively. I got into podcasting as a passion and decided that, like, because I knew I had another lease on life, it made me realize and appreciate that even if I have challenges, to make the best of it.
Yeah, which, I mean, I guess that's a good thing to come out of it because I mean, a lot of people go for have cancer and then like afterwards they never see anything positive about it. It's just the worst thing that ever happened to them, and
Yeah.
even if they survive it, which God bless those who do, but they the rest of their lives is negative because of it because oh, I'm a survivor. I mean, I'm sure there's some like you who take it positively, but not everybody's going to see it that way because there's a lot of negative Nancy's in this world. But
It's how you view it, I guess, how you look at it.
so you said you got over a I mean, I know this isn't really paranormal to begin with, but it's actually interesting and I wanna go on it. You said you got over a toxic relationship, a couple actually. So, did you actually forgive those people or
Yes.
did you just
I forgave them in my own way. It's hard to sometimes forgive, especially if you're hurt and you're dealing with pain. And like my dad, I never had a relationship with my dad, and then he passed away, and it was during the pandemic that he asked me to forgive him in a series of dreams. And he literally came to me in a dream and gave me the last 4 digits of his credit card number that my aunt had still at the time she was alive. She passed away a year ago. And I remember telling her the last four of the number, and she verified that she had the last four of his debit card, credit card in her wallet. That was his wallet. So I knew it was him passing, coming through, passing messages. And this is an alcoholic, drug addict guy that never did anything in a responsible way for me as a child. And I never had a relationship with him. And he came to me a couple of years ago during the height of the pandemic and asked if I'd forgive him. And after I verified it was him and kind of went through a process, I decided to, yes, forgive him. Not only that, but to reconnect with him in a way that now I could say I love my dad. And I could say that every day that I am alive, I think of him in a fond way and I let go of that negative aspects of what he put me through in life. So if you want to talk about that as a way of showing through a paranormal way of how you can forgive someone and let them go, that's probably the best example right there.
which I mean, that is a good example right there, and I mean, I've heard other people tell me, like, that they've helped people reconcile with their parents or with their deceased lovers or siblings, like, after death because they find a way for them to reach out and contact them. And it's a great thing. It's a very emotional, great thing, but, I mean, I personally would love to talk to my father, but I don't know. I just I'd
You
love to talk to my
can. I will say you can on your own. You don't even need a psychic. Anytime you speak, they listen to us. We're their reality show to them. So when we're on the other side,
ah,
they watch
I
us. And anyone who feels like they need to say something like we're frozen in time. From the day they died, I wasn't able to spend that moment with them I needed to do because I was too busy doing X, Y, or Z. They'll say, don't hold on to that. Just like that it wasn't stuck in time then. Time is fluid. Well, time doesn't exist on the other side. So if there's anyone who wants to talk to their loved one, they can do it at any time in any moment. They just need to know that that's definitely something that is real.
Which I agree with that, but it's it's funny because what you just said kind of made me think of like the movie Monkey Bone with Brendan Fraser, where like all the dead people are like watching our nightmares and dreams like in like a crystal ball basically, and they're
Sure.
taking bets on what's gonna happen next. But
It's more simplistic than that. It's just that anyone you love in your life, love is a force of nature like gravity and synchronicity. And if you love somebody, it's an umbilical cord that connects us to the other side. So let's say my grandfather, for example, and I want to communicate with him. Well, I just talk to him and I know he's there because they're like a low signal Wi-Fi. Like they're just there all the time. And the more we can tune into them by clearing out our extraneous thoughts and meditating and praying, it's like eliminating light pollution to see the stars. You go out to the countryside to look at the stars at night. Well, you do that so you eliminate the light pollution that can interfere. Well, people who don't feel like they can connect with their loved ones, I would just say become more contemplative, be more present minded, meditate, clear your mind. Over time you'll find you can connect, I believe, from just my own experiences.
I'm a full believer in that too, just because I've talked to enough people that do it. I myself just I don't know. I have a hard problem clearing my mind. That's the biggest issue is clear my mind's like a huge thing because I always have so much going on between my job, my podcast with the S, multiple podcasts I'm on like 4. So
uh,
it gets and I have 2 kids and a wife to take care of. So it gets hectic as hell. But
it's a lot. Yeah.
it's a lot to clear. It's hard to just sit there for a moment and clear your mind. And usually my mind's clear. It's because of some substance I just
We're
inhaled or whatnot.
designed we're designed to have our minds clear if we allow it to do so. And I believe we're designed, it's natural to be able to talk to our loved ones on the other side, I believe. And I feel like it's just us that we limit our own interactions because either we get too micro focused in ourselves or we're not able to zoom out and see the connections that exist. At least that's how I view what I've experienced in the last 15 years of doing this. Like when I read people and the reading goes real well because the person can connect with the other side. When I pick up on their loved ones and stuff, they can feel the energy flow versus someone who feels shut off. The difference is how much work has that person done within themselves to free them up. Like you said, I know anyone could do it over time. It's just a practice thing. It's like going to the gym and putting muscle on. You're not going to walk in and bench press 275 pounds the first time you sit on the bench or lay on the bench. You're going to have to start somewhere. And the same thing with intuitive stuff with us. Like any of us that want to connect with our loved ones, that want to meditate more, be more grounded and present, focused, it takes time. I've been doing this stuff for almost 20 years. So for me, I can do it. And I realize that the more I do it, the more I enjoy it. Other people might need to take a process to start from, the ground floor and work their way up in the course of their spirituality.
Of course. But what do you say to those who say they want to be able to hear their loved ones talk back to them?
Still the mind, quiet the mind. Um, don't doubt what you get. I think the difference between somebody who calls themselves a full-blown psychic and someone who's, oh, I dabble and be intuitive and I get messages is how much of the information are you discounting versus believing, and how much confidence do you have in it? If you have a lot of confidence in it, you could probably feel pretty comfortable with the information you pick up. But if you doubt yourself, you're going to discredit anything that comes through. So the way I look at that is it really depends on the person, but I feel like everyone has their own levels.
Yeah, I keep saying I gotta find like a coach or something that can like get me through all like the processes I need to get through to get to that point. Because I swear to God, they tell me I can do it, but I have a hard time
I think,
believing it.
you know what? Have you ever driven in traffic and get stuck in traffic? I have many times living in the Northeast or living here in Florida.
Oh,
When
I
you're
live in Massachusetts. You kidding me?
okay, so when you're in traffic and you're stuck there and you're listening to your favorite tune on the radio or whatever it is you're doing, at some point you might zone off, or your mind may wander. That's a form of meditation, whether or not we realize. Any shift in consciousness is the most simplistic form of meditating we do. So when you daydream, and if your mind shifts focus and you're driving and you're stuck or you're on an airplane and all of a sudden you're dozing off slightly, that's a form of meditation. It's just whether or not you accept that that is what it is. We all can do it anytime you shift your consciousness from the present moment to somewhere else, even if it's stillness. That's what I consider meditation. And that's what I feel like you could get more in tuned. So we're all prone to it. It's just how well do we do with it?
Makes sense. Makes sense. So, you mentioned premonitions in the beginning of this episode, and I, I for one I had premonition dreams when I was younger all the time. Like it was never anything vital. It was always just stupid stuff, like a conversation in school, like 3 weeks down the road or something like that. But I'm a big fan of premonition because I've had it happen to me, not in recent times, but I've had it happen to me in the past. And what do you think is the power of those? Like, can we actually learn to like control them and to actually show us things that we need to know?
Great question. I love it. I love premonition dreams. And when they come in, I believe they exist for a reason to give us glimpses of our own path. Either they'll give us some, like in my case, I got to call myself Jason's like the social psychic from a dream like this. Or you may have a dream where you say it's a conversation 3 weeks down the road, but that can give you a glimpse of 3 weeks down the road and maybe give you a chance to focus on whatever it is around that dream you picked up on. So for me, premonition dreams, they exist for a reason. And the way I say they exist, if you think about when you go about your daily routine, and every now and then a rainbow appears, right? And you're driving and you see this rainbow, and you're like, oh my God, look at that beautiful rainbow. Well, a skeptic could say, yeah, well, that's because it rained and there was some sunlight that amplified the crystals of the water and created the rainbow. And I would just say, enjoy the rainbow. There's a sign there from that. And it's there for a reason. So the way I explain premonition dreams are they exist for a reason, just like a rainbow. And you could try to break it down and analyze it and say, well, they exist because this, and this. I'd say appreciate it and look at it as a sign of what it is. Even if it's a premonition dream for a 3 week down the road conversation, well, that's showing you that you have some type of innate ability that you could draw on in the long term for yourself if you start putting the pieces together to kind of learn how to use that dream type sequence to understand it and how to make it applicable in your life to enrich either your life or someone else's or both.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I could see that. It's just, when you're a kid and you have these dreams and like it's conversations that I wasn't even involved in. It's just random conversations between
Oh, it
my
can be overwhelming.
classmates.
It can be fully overwhelming, I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't that they're overwhelming. It's just like literally I'd be sitting in class like a month later and it'd be like, wait a minute, this conversation happened before, but it was in my head. Like, what the hell? And it would be always be the most innate stuff in the world. It would never be anything that had anything to do with me. It would just be people around me having these conversations or doing something stupid, and, like, I would just see it ahead of time, and it just made no
People
sense.
people always act with me when they have a premonition dream of some sort. They're expecting some grandiose message of great significance might be coming through to them. And I'll be like, it may not be anything like that. It might literally be like all pistons are firing and you're getting a premonition dream to remind you that you have premonition dreams and to pay attention to them. Just like the engine light goes on, doesn't mean you have to get a new engine. It might mean you need to bring it in because the sensor went dead. Well,
Yeah.
in our own intuition, maybe we're getting a premonition dream over something that seems so simplistic. It might be doing that to remind you that you do have this capability.
I like that analogy there, I do. The check engine light, but, yeah, it's just like, why couldn't I ever get the premonition dreams where it's like, "The winning lottery numbers are gonna be on this day,"
People
but
ask me all the time, like, why do you struggle financially if you can see the future? And I'd say, well, if I was meant to not see, if I was meant to get the numbers, I'd play them. But I don't believe ethically and morally that people who are intuitive should put playing in numbers, even if it makes their life financially easier. There's a fabric to all this. There's an order to it.
Mhm.
And like I've learned from my vantage point, I used to run away from this stuff thinking I need my life to be basic as a lawyer and I don't need any of these extra ESP type, paranormal things in my life. But then I realized the more I ran, the more I realized it's not about any of that. It's not my ego. It's not about how I perceive it. It's about helping people, working with people, giving clarity and validation where possible, the people I work with in a legit way. And once I realized that and I embraced that, it's like everything kind of fell into place. My understanding of what this is all about in my life, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying because I mean, someone who can see the lottery numbers in their head or something like that, like, if they do play them, karma's going to get them in some
I
shape
would
or
not
way.
want to go out during a thunderstorm. I wouldn't even go out on a cloudy day.
Like if I mean, yeah, if you there is a very thin fabric to reality, and if we try to go against what we're destined to do, it's gonna just straight up mess up your karma, your dharma, whatever you want to
Oh
call
yeah.
it.
Oh yeah.
And it's
Sure.
which I personally am a big believer in karma. I've seen it my whole
I am
life.
too.
I mean,
Never do what you don't want done to you. Always try to live in that state of balance. I'm a Libra, so I believe heavily in all that.
I mean, I'm a Gemini, so I got a good side and a bad side, but still, it's just, I mean, I still the same thing. Like, yeah, you said it best. Live the way you want to be. Like, live live the way you want to be appreciated, and it's just, yeah, I'm not gonna do something I wouldn't want anybody to do to me. So that makes sense to me, and like karma's a big thing to me. Like I used to try to give like money to homeless people here and there, but after a while, like I just started thinking like, how many of them are actually gonna go buy food with the money, and how many
You
of
know,
them
I
are actually
still
gonna
I still do. I still do. My mom's left a big imprint on me, and she's all about pay it forward. And whatever they choose, if I gave a $5 bill to somebody, if they choose to go use it for food, I would pray that's how they use it. But I believe that if I'm in the right place at the right time and somebody is coming up to me for money and I have it in me to pay it forward and give it back to somebody, then I'm going to do that. And the universe will catch up with everybody in their own way. That's how I do.
exactly. I mean, I used to drive around all around Massachusetts basically all
Give
the
out
time
money.
for my job a while ago, and like, I would see people on the side of the road begging and stuff, and, like, if they saw me smoking a cigarette in the car, they'd be like, "Hey, can I get a cigarette?" And I'd be like, "Sure." Like, "That's
Yeah.
something I don't mind giving you because 'cause you're not gonna take one cigarette and go score drugs with it. Like, that's just not the way life is." So, I mean,
Well,
if you
and
can, but
that whole logic in my mind, if I'm homeless, I don't know how many people listening have actually been homeless. I've never been, thank God, homeless. But if someone's homeless, I just feel like my heart goes out to them, and I just want them to be in the best position they could be in, then surround them with healing light and hope. It's hard for me because I go walking here in Tampa, and there is a homeless person on every single corner right now because of the way the economy has been, and it's rough because you want to try to help people. And I always say the best way I can do it is I'll give what I can and pay it forward and pray that that person, can utilize whatever it is they need to get their lives together. But I feel as a society, that's something that I think is pivotal for us as in a society to figure out how to best handle those kind of situations. It doesn't fall on the person; it falls on everybody.
yeah, I mean, I feel the same way. I mean, anybody who's homeless, I luckily have never been there. I had a great family who always took care of me, and
Yeah,
I I eventually just when I broke out my own, I just bought my first house back a year ago, like the last
congratulations.
couple weeks. Yeah, and I mean, even now, like I'm struggling financially, but and everybody's like, "Oh, you should start a Patreon for your podcast." I'm like, "I'm not there yet. I can't do that. No one's gonna give me money for my podcast at this point." I've had a few sponsors here and there, but I can't get like that steady stream. I mean, come on. It's a hard world to break into, the podcasting world, but I try. But we're getting there slowly. And so I mean, still to this day though, if someone needs help, I'm gonna try to help them because even if I'm struggling financially, I'm gonna try to give you the little bit I can just so my karma gets a little better. Like it's
Absolutely.
all
That
it's
whole
all
pay
about
it forward
karma,
thing. Yeah,
which but speaking of karma, what do you think of synchronicity? Do you because I've actually done a full episode on synchronicity. It was one of my first episodes I did. But
I
do
love
you
it. I
yeah.
love synchronicity. I'm going to tell you what I mean by that. I have learned to be guided like a map with GPS. Synchronicity guides me. And how that works, it's a very abstract concept. Let's say you're grieving somebody. Let's say you're really depressed. Let's say your mom passed or your aunt passed. I'll say aunt. Let's say your aunt passed and it's been a year since she died and you're having a really hard year with it and you're really close with her and she raised you like a second mom. And let's say that you're really struggling and the anniversary of the year is coming up and you're dreading it. It's a week away and you start thinking about her and you notice through the whole year, every time you thought about her, you'd have a random dream or you would have something that would remind you of her. Maybe a song of hers came on the radio after you thought about her once and you dismissed the thought while you were driving home from work. Or maybe as you're in a mall, you smell her perfume and you're like, oh, it could be anyone wearing the perfume. But it happened to be also in lieu of when you were thinking about her. And then you notice during that week, up to leading to the anniversary date that you start noticing not only her perfume, and you're around people, you smell the perfume, you can think of her, you have thoughts pop in your head about her, and you think, oh, well, that might just be because. Then you have a dream with her, then you hear a song with her, one of her favorite songs on the radio. All those kind of things happen for a reason. And I consider synchronicity is the connecting the dots between all those breadcrumbs, all those messages, and all those cues. So it's a way of piecing. For me, synchronicity is being able to like peel back the onion of our lives, like being able to understand that there's a matrix kind of thing and that we are all a part of it, but then peeling it back and seeing from that layer of what you've peeled back the validation that your aunt is still around because she's sending you these messages. She's sending you the song. She's sending you all these things because that's her way of relaying back to you through a dream. You piece it all together and you can see this kind of communication that's very subtle. It's nondescript. It's not something you're going to be able to pinpoint. But when all of the series of them happens and you zoom out, you could see through synchronicity that, in fact, it may be the 1-year anniversary of when your aunt passed, but it's a breakthrough because now you realize she can communicate with you in a very subtle way and she's not dead like we think the way dead is. So that's an oversimplification of what I think synchronicity is like, but it's also the best way I could explain it to someone who may not have experienced it themselves, or if they have, it's that little nagging feeling that you know for a fact, the synchronistic moment of when you're thinking about someone who's on the other side, and that favorite radio song or music video or movie or a bird on a balcony or a penny on the floor, it doesn't matter, the sign, the message, the cue, but it's all the same in terms of concepts.
It's funny you mentioned the penny on the floor thing, because one of my first one we kinda had a falling out, but one of my first episodes was with a podcast friend of mine, and he had this thing where after his, mother and father died, he would find pennies on the floor constantly, like, in places where no one would drop a coin,
That's a
and it
message
just
from beyond. My grandfather does the same thing with me. I was contemplating, oh, should I move to a larger office space a couple of years ago when my money was up and down, and I found pennies afterwards. Right after I asked that question myself, I found a penny by the car door. I found a penny inside the car, and I found a penny in the restaurant I sat at afterwards. And none of those places would be like where you would see those kind of things. It's just like the answers come in a certain way that lets you know that.
yeah, I mean, and he also saw, like, the clock would always say, like, 11,
Oh,
11 or
synchronistic times, angel numbers, those are huge too. While we were
yeah.
just talking a few minutes ago, we were talking about a point and it was 33:33 in terms of the amount of time we're live on the show right now. And I noticed I didn't get a chance to bring it up because we were in thought about something, but every time I give a reading or I talk to somebody and then there's a time frame reference, it always reinforces whatever I'm talking about. And I feel like that's the universe's way of showing a wrinkle of validation with angel numbers.
Yeah, I mean, I'm big into synchronicity. I think it exists 100%. It had happened to me once in a while, like back when I had cable, like I'd be thinking about my dad, and all of a sudden, like I'd be flipping through channels, and there's a James Bond movie on, which was his favorite movie series
There you
ever.
go. No, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. In the simplistic form, that's it right there.
Which I mean, yeah, I guess you could put that up to chance because there is a James Bond movie on probably one a weekend at least on some channel. But
A chance
I
would
mean,
be during the Christmas holidays, the day after Christmas, you see your favorite Christmas movie on. That's chance.
yeah, but I mean, I guess. I mean, I I don't know. I went so long before I did this podcast with not believing in any kind of higher power, not believing in anything, that like it's hard for me still to accept things that I know nowadays are true.
No matter how
Because
hard our lives are here on earth, I could tell you there's definitely a higher power dictating above us, leading us in our own path because I've seen it firsthand. And at least I can speak for that. Whether or not anyone else chooses to understand it, I can say when you go through like cancer, and we all have gone through, different things in the last few years, I feel like there's a purpose to it and there's an order to it. And even if it doesn't feel like it's all working out at that moment in time, there's a larger purpose behind everything, I feel like.
yeah, I mean, I know that now. After talking to so many people who are psychics and everything else in this paranormal field, I've talked to so many different people that like I it's funny because some psychics and mediums to talk to, I get like a feeling in the middle of my head I can't push away. And my vision goes a little blurry for some of them, even if I'm not drinking or anything like that. Like it's just my vision goes a little blurry, and I'm like, I. They all say, yeah, it's my calling to like accept something bigger than myself. But
Well, usually when one of your senses are deadened slightly to allow for a psychic sense to come in, that's usually a spiritual thing. Like when I do a reading, or if I want to tune into somebody, I'll take 3 deep breaths. I'll close my eyes a little bit, but I'll usually dull one sense, even just ever so slightly through breath work and dulling the sense a little bit. That allows me to tune in and kind of pick up things.
yeah, I mean, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's because I'm talking to someone who does that and like their abilities kind of like leaning on mine a little bit, or I don't know. I mean, it's weird because when that happens, usually at the end of the recording, like after we go off live, the psychics would be like, "I have a message for you," and it's led to some weird messages from people I never expected to get messages from, but still, like it's just
I
and
kind of
I
laugh at when people come to me for a reading and they're like, I want you to pick up on the 2 words I last said to my dad before he died. And I say, well, I understand you want me to do that, but that's not how spirituality works. It's not like it's a button I
yeah,
press and that exact phrase will pop in. Whether or not your dad wants to relay that to me, or if someone else is going to come through to relay something to me, it's a force of nature, spirituality, and it's not static. But I have people thinking that if I'm a real psychic, I'll be able to pick this up for them. And I'll say, that's not how it flows, at least not in my experiences of doing this thousands of times. You can't just go to a psychic and ask them, can you pick up my dad's name? And what was his date of birth? And what address did we live at? Just the numbers. Like I have people ask me questions like that, and sometimes I'll come up with answers, but it's not like a 20 question type experience. It's meant to be connecting us to people on the other side so that we don't grieve them and we understand our bigger purpose in terms of connecting with each other.
which I get that. I mean, it makes sense. I but I think people have been so they've seen so much in Hollywood about what psychics can do, and they've been frauded by a lot of the fakes out there because they are out there. I
Oh
don't
yeah,
think
of
anyone I
course.
ever I don't think anyone I ever talked to my podcast is a fake, but I know they're out there because I've seen them, and I actually talked to Corby Milteed. She actually wrote a book called The Yellow Brick Road, like Follow the Yellow Brick Road, and
Yes.
it's all about how to tell like a fake psychic from a good psychic. So,
I met Corby. I had her on my show before.
oh,
So
she's
she's
amazing
amazing.
guest. I I,
Yeah,
I love
yeah.
that. I love having her on. But
She's amazing.
a- and I think what she's doing is important work. The fact that she's trying to teach people how to find a real psychic versus a fraud who just wants to make money
Absolutely.
off you. But
And I
so
agree
actually,
with that. I think there should be a code of ethics for psychics. We have them as lawyers. We deal with the public interest, and as psychics, it's because it's for strictly entertainment purposes only, right? That's what we have to say, and we have to be limited how we read people. But reality is, psychics should have a code of ethics. They should have something that holds them accountable. That if they perjure or if they somehow rip people off, they should be held accountable beyond just an attorney general or something from the state legal action, criminal action.
yeah, I mean, I agree. They should every business should have a code of ethics, no matter what they are. I mean, podcasters have codes of ethics. It's kind of
Exactly.
unspoken, unwritten, but we have it, as you well know. I mean, we're not going to allow our guests to come on our show and just spew hate speech or something like that. Like
Correct.
that would be like that's a code. Like we don't do that because one, we don't want to lose listeners, and two, because I mean, it's just not right. But we keep talking about life after death, and I've heard a lot of different theories on this. But what do you think happens after we die?
Great question. I love this question. So I'll probably present a theory that you haven't heard before in terms of description, but it's just my own way of referencing it. So I believe all the people I've communicated with on the other side, they give me a pretty simplistic way of explaining life after death. It's like falling asleep on the couch while watching TV is the transitional part of it. So think of you and I talking right now, and after this, you choose to go watch TV and sit on your couch, and you just happen to watch one of these shows that put you in this lullaby, and you're so relaxed and you're content. We just did our show, and you fall asleep, and you're now on the other side. Not saying that's what death is like for people who die. Whether or not, I mean, keep in mind they don't come back and advertise it, but that's the frame of reference I've gotten from the readings I've done as a medium over the years. And so what I mean by that is, if you think that you're breathing right now, you are, but would you pay attention to your breath unless I said you're breathing right now? Most of us, it's automatic. We breathe and we take our breaths. Well, if I was to tell you that when you cross over, it's that automatic, just like the breaths we take when we're alive that we don't pay attention to. And I mentioned earlier, like when you're stuck in traffic, your mind may kind of go from one transitional state in consciousness to the next. Well, that's how death works as well. It's like a shift in our conscious state when our body and the spirit separate, and the actual like conscious awareness of it would be falling asleep on the couch while watching TV. It happens so seamlessly, so fast, and so non-eventful that when people cross over on the other side, we have a greeter. And our greeter's another relative that we know is on the other side. And they volunteer to be our greeter. And they introduce us to what life is like without a body limiting us. And that we're pure energy connected to everything else in the universe, which means we can communicate with our loved ones. We can watch our grandson paint a wall. We could watch our daughter taking her other kids to the game, or we could watch, it's unabounded. And I've had literally readings where people come in and pop in and talk about the things that family member has been doing for 2 weeks to let them know that when you think of death, you think I'm in the ground, or you think I'm dust to dust. If I was dust to dust, then how did I know that you went and played the lottery last week and that you took the money and didn't tell your wife about it? Like crazy stuff like that, they'll come through and say. You won $300 and you threw it in a side account, but didn't tell your wife. Uncle blah, blah, blah is watching you. He knows you're doing that. He's not telling you to call you out to make you feel uncomfortable. He knows you painted the wall blue in the other room because he knows you hate gray, and that you had an argument with your wife about the paint because she thought she didn't like the way it looks and you need to repaint it. But he's saying, you know what, you might want to get someone else to do that professionally because he's noticed it and he's telling you your wife isn't happy about it. That's the kind of stuff they pop in and tell us all the time.
Yeah. So it's funny you say that about the fall asleep watching TV thing, because before this show, when my other show didn't work out, I went back into the living room and was watching Rugrats with my daughter because
Okay.
she loves the old school Rugrats from when I was a kid, and I don't mind watching it because it's just good cartoons.
Oh
But
yeah.
like it's just like it's funny because I fall asleep on the couch all the time, and my wife's like, I wake up a little bit while later. My wife's like, "Did you fall asleep?" And I'm like, "No."
So in the future, if anyone asks, have you ever died and come back? You can say, yes, I did. And they'll say, oh my God, what was it like? Anytime you fall asleep on the couch or watching TV, that's what it's like. Could you imagine if that's what everyone understood death to be like? It would be such a non-event. We'd all be like, why did we all worry and fear and make such a big deal about this, right?
Exactly. I mean, I would think it's a little bit different for those who are dying, screaming in pain, I mean, the first thing that comes
Well,
to
there's
mind
a
is that is
limit
like,
to the pain, is what I'm trying to tell you too. Even when someone's dying and writhing and screaming in pain, when the time the actual body separates from the soul,
yeah,
you're not feeling pain anymore. And the soul cocoons, the body is one thing, but the soul cocoons to the next place. So you really, people who have violent deaths, a lot of times the parent, the children, whoever's left over, they beat themselves up thinking, oh my God, my loved one died. And they were, horrified going through this torture and I'm like, yeah, well, they don't want you to think of it that way. Because for them, even if they had a motorcycle accident, a train injury, or an injury from getting hit from behind by a train, they don't remember it that way because they got to the next spot before the rest of that happens. Once the body separates from the soul, you're done. You're not here in the body anymore, and it's just a vehicle. If you think about graveyards, think of junkyards, because that's what I believe the body is. When we leave it, it's like a
oh,
vehicle that's left that decays. It's like your
basically,
car. You wouldn't go to the junkyard to visit your first car from when you were 17 or 16 if you're 50, because that's your first vehicle. That's how I look at our bodies.
which makes sense to me. I mean, yeah, I mean, cemeteries are like Rodney Dangerfield said in Caddyshack, cemeteries and country clubs, the biggest waste of real estate in the world. But, but I mean, it's
I
just,
can agree with that. I always compare cemeteries to junkyards.
I
So
mean,
if
yeah, it's
you're
just,
going to go decorate a slab in the ground and call it a tombstone and say that's where your relative is and that's the only place you could talk to her, I'd say you're really hurting yourself there, because you could talk to her from your couch any time of
I
the
mean,
day, any day of the week, any day of the year. It doesn't matter. You could talk more with your loved one than when they were here. and they're like a captive audience because they're connected to you. But you got to believe that.
Exactly. I mean, I try to my grandma's like that. Like she thinks she has to go visit my grandfather at the cemetery for the last 12 years now, like once a week, twice a week at least. Like originally it was like every day. And I'm like, I tried telling her once, my grandma, there's nothing in there except decaying bones and probably overrun by bugs. But I mean, yeah, they got the steel box, so maybe there's not bugs in there yet, but there will be eventually. But
Who he
it's just
is around her all the time.
exactly. I mean, and it's funny. My grandfather actually, the same grandfather actually appeared to me in a dream 2 nights ago, and we were at some in the dream we were at some house I had never saw in my life before. But and he had a thicker mustache than I ever saw him with in my life. But I actually had to fight my wife that night before, and he said to me in the dream, like it was the last thing I remember before I woke up. He was standing on like a staircase on top, like over a railing, like as I was leaving, talking to me, and he just said to me, he's like, Jeremy, if she's unhappy, let her go. If she's unhappy, let her go. And like that's the last thing I remember is him saying that to me in that dream. And I was like, I woke up and told my wife what he said, and my wife and her face was just like priceless. And I'm like, do we need to talk? But uh, I mean, we had a fight night before, so I mean, our fights can get vicious, but I mean, they usually heal in a day or so. But I mean, I'm a man. I f up, but
When
that's the
you
way life
love someone
happens.
a lot, you're gonna have disagreements and fights happen. It's how you get back from that, right? How you make up
Oh,
for.
especially when you're raising kids. Yeah,
Oh yeah.
especially when you're raising kids, you fight over how to raise the kids constantly. It's just how it is. But let me ask you this: do you believe in reincarnation?
Yes, I do.
Because because I've heard multiple people tell me that they know because spirits have told them that the great beyond up there is basically like a waiting room, and all these spirits are waiting around to be reincarnated unless they have reached their highest potential, then they can actually move on to a resting place for spirits, kind of.
I have my own unique angle on reincarnation or past lives, as they call it, in the different terms. And I would just say this: I've come across certain people in my life that I feel like I've known from a prior life that I just mesh with so well, and I can work so well with them that it makes it like there's no other way to understand that but to think there must have been a prior life that we knew each other, because how well can we go past, we all have walls up with each other, and how is it that certain people can really get through those walls as compared to others, and how is it that people fall in love at first sight, for example, or have that perfect friendship slash relationship where they have a work spouse, so to speak, and they can work so well together, right? But then there's other people you try to date and you just don't see each other at the same way you should. So I believe there is something with that. I think that there's a spiritual connection you could have with somebody, and it may be extremely confusing to why does this exist with this person but not with that person. But I've kind of chalked it up to say that I recognize the patterns when I have someone like that in my life, that it has to be a residual past life, reincarnation or something like that. But the way I take it is I don't delve that deep to say, oh, that person must have had a past life with me. And because I feel like we might have multiples, I look at it as honoring it. The universe is introducing me to this person for a reason. I'm supposed to have a special relationship with them in this lifetime. And it makes me recognize it easier.
Which I agree. I can see the point behind that because I mean, it's funny. My best friend who I lived with back in like, we lived together like in 2014, 15. We finally moved in together. He finally moved into my house after my dad moved down south, and like we were living together in this trailer in this mountain in New York, and like we're the best of friends though for years before that. And he sadly died when the trailer burned down after I moved out like in 2016, 17, somewhere around there. And it's funny though. I used to always joke with everybody and be like, "Yeah, he was a female in his previous life, and we were married." But I mean,
Because of your connection, you've probably felt that.
because I mean, we were very close, and I mean, I was one of the few people that could put up with him. He was a grade A asshole, but I was one of the few people who could put up with his sense of humor and his view of the world because I had a similar view of the world at that point, somewhat. But it's just like it's funny because it's funny you said that because that's made me think of him like right away. Like we in a previous life we had to be friends too because as soon
There's
as we met each
only
other,
There's no other way to explain that kind of like twin flame connections, or people have a runner and a chaser, and the person runs from you, and you might have only met this person like 3 times, but it's chaotic nonetheless. And they're always on your mind and you're always on their mind, but you don't know whether or not you're on each other's mind unless you actually slow down and talk to each other about it. I've had so many people tell me about their twin flame dynamics or soulmate challenges, as you
Mm.
call it.
It's just the way it is. There's also my cousin's husband who we always the family always jokes around and says that we're each other's boyfriends because we go. I'll steal him away from her all the time to go to the movies with him and see like Marvel movies and whatnot. But and it seems like we're meant like to do that type of stuff. Like ever since I met him, like we just became best friends kind of. But that relationship has kind of died with since I moved in with my wife and her kids. So but kids kill all your relationships. So but that's the way it goes. But we are getting close to the end here. But I want to ask you this though: what is your favorite part of being a psychic slash intuitive? Like, what's your favorite part? Like, what brings you the most joy out of it?
Just like us sitting on this, doing this tonight, never a dull moment. Always has something that you can talk about, talk to. It's the perpetual icebreaker, as I'll call it. Like I had a couple of years ago, I went to my best friend's wedding, and I was the informal entertainment without even realizing it because she just kept telling people at the wedding that I'm a psychic, and they'd come up to me. And it's so funny when people find out you're a psychic, they look at you a little like guarded, and they'll kind of come up to you, but they'll be kind of a little hesitant, and they'll be like, "I'm a skeptic." I'm like, "Okay, well, do you pick up anything about me? What do you see for me?" Or I'll have somebody say, "I always thought I was psychic. Is this what it's like?" Like, so you always have like from both spectrums. You have the skeptic that wants you to read them, right? Or you'll have the person that thinks they're psychic themselves that wants to confirm with you their experiences of being psychic. And I love both because I feel like you could talk to the skeptic and show them that there's more to their lives than just the 3D world we live in. And the person who is intuitive, that's trying to become more intuitive, there's so much to work with that because you could go through all your real life experiences, like we were kind of doing in this interview today, like comparing notes. And that's how we learn to appreciate these things. And in my opinion, when it comes to paranormal things, my goal is to make the paranormal normal. Like, why do we have to call anything spiritual paranormal outside of what's normal? That's just like us talking about death. Like, I look at death as a transition where so many other people think that's where it all ends, and it's not. It's not where it all ends. Because how the hell would I be able to pick up on all these other people from the other side for all these years unless I have a damn well imagination that's very inventive, creative, and accurate? And I don't give myself that much credit. So, from my vantage point, I think it makes it entertaining because I get to meet cool people like you and talk on your show, and I get people on my show that I just feel like it's the glue that fits it all together. In this lifetime for me, I'm meant to be a psychic and an advocate for psychics, to talk about the positives of it and encourage people not to be afraid of it. And if you're psychic yourself, don't run away from it because you can do a lot of good for others.
Exactly, and I feel like you just stole the tagline from my show there, though.
I didn't need to.
It's all good. It's all good. It's a good. I love when you guys do that. You're not the first guest to do that, but I love when they do it because it's like it gives my show more meaning because the name
Oh
makes
yeah,
sense.
absolutely.
But
It falls right into place. It's reality.
I, as soon as you said that, I was smiling so big. I was like, "Motherfucker!" But like, I love when people do that. It just like I've actually had people in the show straight up say like, "Paranormal is the new normal," and I'm like,
You're like, have you just read the tagline underneath where we're talking right now? Because it's right there and it's on Spotify.
I mean, I took out the "is" because it just sounded better without the "is," but
You can be like, oh,
but
you
yeah.
read well. You can read right across the bottom of that screen right there.
Well, everybody knows the name of my show when they come on, of course, but it's just funny because it's like, well, that's why I named the show I did because in my mind, the paranormal is becoming more and more a regular thing now that more people want to talk about than they were 50, 40, 30, 20 years ago even. I'm not gonna
Exactly.
say 10 because 10 years ago it started getting big, but 20 years ago, when I was a kid in the 90s and the 2000s, you were lucky to find any show about Bigfoot, aliens, Loch
How about
Ness, any of that.
How about the X Files? That was like the biggest show of the '90s, and it was the biggest, like, ooh, taboo X Files, right? And it made its heyday because it was able to be in that area and make it more mainstream than we realized.
Funny story behind that, actually. As a kid, I used to watch all the Animation Domination before they called that on Sunday nights on Fox, and like Simpsons and King of the Hill and all that. And like when the X Files would come on though, that theme song would scare the shit out of me as a kid. And I would turn off the TV and run to my bedroom and put on Nickelodeon. Like that's how
No
much
more
it
X Files. No more.
like the theme song scared me when I was a kid. Like the
You know what's
now
funny?
now now
As you
now
said that,
now
I heard the
now.
song in my head. Like I know that
Yeah,
song so distinctive. Most of us know that song because I have this thing.
I mean in in the late 2000s, I watched all of it on Netflix and I loved it because I got into the paranormal at that point. But I mean, I was always in the paranormal, but I just was old enough where I could like enjoy it. And I finally had like a place I could watch all of it without having to go to the video store and rent every freaking VHS or DVD to watch it. But it's just
Absolutely.
so. So I mean, I love Mulder and Scully. Don't get me wrong, but I do.
Me
We're
too.
actually do on my music show. We're actually doing a TV theme songs bracket this weekend, a two-part thing on Saturday and Sunday. And X Files, I believe, is in the no X Files is going to be in the part is going to be on next year in part 3 and 4 because the list I have is huge.
Oh,
But
that's great.
I mean, yeah, I love the theme song for X Files, but it was my ringtone for a long time. But back in the day when ringtones mattered,
You know,
but
think of it this way: you put a ringtone like that on your phone. Let's say you get your oil change, and you leave your phone down and walk away, and everyone looks at you when you go pick up that ringer. You know that they know you like the X Files because that
oh
distinctive.
yeah,
So
same as back in the day, my ringtone when I was a teenager was Undertaker's theme song because everybody knew I liked Undertaker. But back that's going back. But going down memory lane here. But well, I want to thank you for coming on, Jason. You've been an amazing guest, and
thank
I've had a
you,
lot of fun doing this show. I mean, it's been a great hour.
thank you.
So tell them where they could find you, your
Yeah.
podcast. Just sell yourself.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I want to thank you so much for giving me this opportunity and let you know. Um, I have a couple of shows myself I'm working on. The Social Psychic Radio Show is my original podcast. It's going into its 5th season. That's actually moving over to our producer with Electricast Media shortly. And I also have what's called the Paranormal Universe Network, which is a network for any podcasters with paranormal programming. We're setting that up with our producers as well, and I'm bringing my show on as like the signature show for it. But we're offering a safe place to help podcasters that want to monetize their shows. That's coming up as well. And then I have and if anyone in your audience is interested in that opportunity, you could reach out to me and I'll be happy to explain how that's all working. We're launching the Paranormal Universe with Electricast Media probably between now and January. And then
We'll talk.
the yeah, absolutely. And then Psychic Visions is a new show that I've been working on this past year with the same producers and my best friend Megan Kane, and that's coming out hopefully before the end of the year as well. We have some putting out a new show takes a lot more effort sometimes, as you know, and so I have those 3 things going on. And if anyone wants to reach out to me, you can find me on social media, the Social Psychic, Psychic Visions podcast on Instagram, and the Paranormal Universe Network will be coming out and being launched shortly thereafter. So.
Well, once again, I thank Jason for coming on. It's been a blast of a show, and I am so
Absolutely.
happy I found him. But as all my listeners know, you can find me on Facebook as Paranormal New Normal / Maniacal Music Musings Podcasts with a S Facebook group. You can find me on Twitter and the Gram as @JuggaloBastard. And you can find me on TikTok as Juggalo Bastard Podcast. Paranormal episodes are not up there yet, but they will be eventually. Gotta finish getting the music ones up. And you can find us on YouTube as Paranormal New Normal. Very simple way to find us there. All my videos are uploaded there the day the podcast released. And I would like to thank my listeners for listening, and please come back in half a week to hear your next episode. And once again, one final time, thank you, Jason. It's been an amazing episode, and it's been such a fun episode. I loved it.
Thank you.
So
Appreciate you so much for having me on. I really do. Thank you.
my pleasure. And listeners, I will catch you next time. Have a good one.